Hi everyone, welcome to the Data Monk. In this playlist, we will talk about statistic. Today, our topic will be dispersion and measure of dispersions. Before we start, don't forget to hit a like and share button. So to know measure of dispersion, first we will know what is dispersion. As the name suggests, dispersion is the state of getting dispersed or spread from the certain point. As you can see in this figure, this white light is dispersed into 7 colors, creating a rainbow. So this is a dispersion of light. So now you know the basic definition of dispersion. So we will know what do you mean by measure of dispersion. In statistic, the measure of dispersion help to interpret the variability of the data. In simple words, to know how much homogeneous or heterogeneous is the data. As you can see in this figure, this is our homogeneous data and this is our heterogeneous data. They both differ in the spread of the data. So now we are familiar with measure of dispersion and dispersion. So we will look into the type of measure of dispersion. The measure of dispersion can break into absolute measure and relative measure. At first, what is absolute measure of dispersion? An absolute measure of dispersion contains the same unit as the original data set. In simple words, the absolute dispersion method expresses the variation in terms of the average of deviation of observation like standard or mean deviation. We can further break down absolute measure of variation into four types: range, quartile deviation, mean deviation, and standard deviation. So let's start with range of the data. It is very simple term in statistic. Range is simply the difference between the maximum value and minimum value. Let's discuss with this example. We are given the age of the student and asked to calculate the range. So as per our formula, we will take the difference between the highest and lowest in our range, which is 18 minus 11 equal to 7. Now we will look into another type of absolute measure, which is quartile and quarter deviation formula. As the name suggests, quartile are value that divide our list into quarters. And for quartile deviation, the formula is simply the half of the distance between quarter 3 and quarter 1. So you can look into the formula, which is Q3 minus Q1 by Q2, where Q3 is third quarter and Q1 is first quarter. So now you all are wondering how to calculate Q1 and Q3. So Q1 can be calculated by total number of sample by 4, because there are 4 quarters, and Q3 can be calculated by Q1 into 3. Now we will move to a third part, which is mean and mean deviation. What do you mean by mean? It is the sum of all the observation by total number of observation. So to understand clearly, we will look into the example. In this figure, we have 5 people with different height: 150, 160, 170, 180 and 180. So to calculate the mean, first we have to sum all this value, which will come 840 centimeter. And then we will divide it by 5 people, as there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 840 by 5 will give us 168 centimeter, which will be our mean for the height. And as for mean deviation, it measures how far each number in a set is from the mean, and thus from every other digit in a set. As you can look into the figure, this is our data points, and we will calculate the distance between them from the mean. The formula for the mean deviation is given as the data point minus the mean of the data plus the another data point minus the mean of the data, and so on. And finally, after getting the sum of all this, we will divide it by the n, where n is our total number of population. Now, for last topic of absolute measure, you will never understand standard deviation if you just go by the formula. What exactly standard deviation mean? As you can look into the figure, by using standard deviation, we have a way of knowing which data represent what. Now, we will look into the relative measure of variation. First of all, why we need relative measure of dispersion? The need for relative measure of dispersion is when we have two or more data set. This measure of variation compare value without the units. Now, we can further divide relative measure of variation into four types: coefficient of range, coefficient of quartile deviation, coefficient of mean deviation, and coefficient of variation. So first of all, how do we calculate coefficient of range? Coefficient of range is simply given by x max minus x minimum by x max plus x minimum. Let's take an example for better understanding. We have given a data set which is 68, 79, 98, 89, 63, 108, 125 and 117, and we have to find the coefficient of range. So to find coefficient of range, First, let us arrange the given data in the ascending order, which will go as 63, 68, 79, 89, 98, 108, 117, 125. So the largest value of the data set is 125 and the smallest value of the data set is 63. So first we will calculate the range, which is largest minus smallest. So the range of the data will be 62. Now for the coefficient of range, as we have looked into the figure, so it will be largest minus smallest upon largest plus smallest. So it will come 62 by 188, which will give us 0.33. So the range for this data set is 62 and the coefficient of the range is 0.33. Now for the coefficient of quartile deviation, how do we calculate the coefficient of quartile deviation? We can calculate the coefficient of quartile deviation simply by this formula, which is q3 minus q1 upon q3 plus q1. As we have already seen what are q3 and q1, we just have to calculate the coefficient of quartile deviation. By using this, we can compare two datasets of same type. Now, what do you mean by coefficient of mean deviation? The coefficient of mean deviation, it is given by the mean deviation by average. In absolute variation, I have explained you what do you mean by mean deviation and average. Average is just another word for mean. So you know how to calculate mean deviation and average. So by the formula, we can also calculate the coefficient of mean deviation. At last, we will talk about standard deviation. The standard deviation is given by SD by mean, where SD stands for standard deviation. So for all the relative measure of dispersion, we can compare two data set with ease. Now we have discussed about what is absolute variation, what do you mean by relative variation. Thank you, hope you like the content. For more amazing content, don't forget to hit a like and share button.